Chapter 24. Shadow Falls. "So what do you think of this?" asked Mr. Chevelle in Jim's office. Mr. Chevelle held out the green paper to Jim. He was puffing away on a large cigar that Jim felt most likely smelled awful. Jim was never a smoker. Fortunately, the ghost system failed to offer a sense of smell, so the smoke did little more than add a few faint clouds to the office simulation. Seeing him hold out the paper left Jim confused for a moment, as Mr. Chevelle was clearly handing it to him. Then it occurred to Jim that the ghost system did virtual duplication on everything in the room, so maybe it could do so for new items as well. Jim trepidly reached out and grabbed the green paper. Sure enough, a virtual copy of the object split from the real-world one. In Jim's hands was the Syndicate's new $20 bill. Jim looked at the bill, turned it over, and examined the detail. It had some clear anti-counterfeiting measures. A flexible chip could just barely be seen if held up to the light. The art on the bill itself was heavily inspired by the old United States dollar. It was all monochromatic green with hordes of classical, frilly detail. On the front it even had a picture of Andrew Jackson, albeit one Jim had never seen before. It even said $20 and the Western Federation Bank. "It's very nice. I like the classic design," said Jim. "Yes, we got some of the best artists around working on it. But of course it's worthless without you, Jim," said Mr. Carvel, throwing a little flattery Jim's way. Mr. Carvel might have been dirty and had hands infinitely more blood-stained than AZ, but he really knew how to treat talent. A class act all the way. "You flatter me, Mr. Carvel," said Jim. "So how are the numbers looking?" Jim already knew the answer to this question, but it couldn't hurt to have the old mobster repeat them back. Nate's trade network had been going for nearly 2 weeks and was already showing great growth. The trade network listed available items and needed, but in addition also showed a dollar amount for each item. Of course, there were no dollars yet, but the numbers whetted people's appetite for the new currency. If all went well, the Syndicate wanted to roll out the new bills after the network had been running for a month. Small amounts at first, then more as people demanded them. Eventually, tons of new money flowing out into the city, and all under the careful thumb of Mr. Carvel and his cronies. Jim could only imagine the leaders of the crime ring, with buckets under their chins, just to catch all the saliva that must be dripping from their mouths. Mr. Carvel smiled slyly and said, very well indeed, but I think you know that better than me. We're waking up a sleeping giant, Jim. Once the markets rise up again, it'll be a financial boom unlike any seen in the last 100 years. And you'll be at the head of all of it, right? Said Jim with a smile. Jim couldn't care too much about money. As an accountant, it hurt his soul a little to say that, but lacking a body and living in VR, there was only so much the world could really offer him. Money was an abstraction to him now. His primary concern was survival for himself and the other head boys, especially Sarah and Nate. Well, myself and my colleagues. You haven't met the inner circle yet, but they're keen on meeting you, said Mr. Carvel with a smile. Then a dark look swept over his face. He took out the cigar he was smoking and stepped uncomfortably close to Jim. But there is a matter we need to discuss regarding your use of my internet access. Jim was stunned for a moment. He fought not to freak out. How much could Mr. Carvel know? And would denying anything help? Jim had considered what he would do if Mr. Carvel found out. He had practiced this in his head. The first step was to admit something had occurred, so as to appear honest, but be really vague about the details. Allow the old mobster time to show his hand. Yes, I hope it wasn't a problem, said Jim with as much confidence as he could muster. It depends on what you're trying to do, Jim, said Mr. Carvel darkly. Crap, this was bad. Whatever the old mobster had seen, it looked very incriminating. If it's your plan to cut myself and my colleagues out of the future of the dollar, it will end very badly for you and your friends, and that end won't come quick. As terrifying as that statement was, Jim actually felt massively relieved. While lying could be difficult, telling the truth was easy. Jim wanted rescue, not whatever shifty banking scam the Syndicate was brewing up. What is money to somebody in my position? I don't eat. I don't need a house. I'm free of most real-world problems. This banking thing is your world, not mine. I just need a safe place for myself and my compatriots to hold up, and I'm golden, said Jim with quite a bit more confidence than he normally had. He didn't want to seem too cocky, but really, Mr. Carvel wasn't even close to his true motives. Mr. Carvel eyed Jim's holographic image closely. While not as animalistically violent as AZ, this man was no less dangerous. He put the cigar back in his mouth, and he continued to stare at Jim. Jim's confidence started to slip as he could feel the man's eyes burning their way through his ghostly image. Then he took the cigar out and smiled. Very true, Jim. You make an excellent point. And you and your friends are safer here than anywhere else in the world. My organization will keep you all protected. You should keep that in mind, said Mr. Carvel in a somewhat friendly tone. Then Mr. Carvel relaxed a bit and continued. I tell you what, water under the bridge, all right? But don't you and your friends go abusing our internet access anymore, understand? I trust you, Jim, but that kind of thing makes my colleagues very nervous. And when they get very nervous, bad things happen to everyone involved. Do we understand each other? Said Mr. Carvel as he looked directly at Jim. Yes, sir, Mr. Carvel. It won't happen again, said Jim with great relief. Mr. Carvel excused himself and left after that. Jim waited a few minutes before returning to his workstation so as not to look too suspicious. He felt like he had dodged a less than metaphorical bullet. Using Nate's hidden texting system, he contacted Nate to give him the good and bad news. Carvel is on to our internet access. Don't use it again for a while, texted Jim. Nate texted back with a frowny face and said, Oh crap, I didn't get to run another search for replies to your post. It's fine, maybe we'll try again in a few weeks. Until then, don't do anything sketchy. He's worried we're going to try to steal from the trade network, texted Jim. That was what he was worried about? Man, if I wanted to rob him, I wouldn't need help from the internet, texted Nate. Don't even kid about it, Nate. If he gets nervous, we could all end up dead, texted Jim. Yeah, fine. There was another thing I wanted you to know. I've been monitoring the traffic on the Bloody Eye's mesh network. There's been a lot of trade for guns and ammo, texted Nate. The Bloody Eye is still a thing? Replied Jim. He honestly had no idea. The last he heard, Frankie said he was going to handle things. It sounded like they were going to disband the gang, or maybe even kill all of the colorful reprobates, just to keep them from causing trouble. It was disturbing to hear that they were still in existence. Still, Frankie was Mr. Carvel's man. As long as AZ was gone, how big of a threat could they be? Yes, still alive and going strong, texted Nate. Don't worry about it, texted Jim. They're just another part of the syndicate, and we work for the guy in charge. We don't need to worry about the Bloody Eye anymore. Okay, but they are really stockpiling the weapons, texted back Nate. He included a bug-eyed smiley face just to show how shocking he thought the catch was. Jim considered what he should do with this knowledge. Could Frankie be planning something? Moreover, what sort of trouble could be caused if Jim said anything to Mr. Carvel? He was already skating on thin ice over the internet access. Mentioning that Nate had been spying on the syndicate's network would most certainly get them both in serious trouble. Maybe the gang was just converting over to gun running for income. Without Jim's help, it was hard to say if that gang of idiots could ever make a profit. It's probably nothing. Maybe they're gun running now? We can't let Carvel know you've been spying on his network. Maybe I'll ask him how they're doing tomorrow, texted Jim. All right, it's up to you, texted Nate. Then he dropped out of the covert chat. Jim's hands snapped back to their actual position, and he continued to work as if nothing had happened. It was inconceivable the Bloody Eye could be any kind of threat to them. All that time under AZ's thumb must have made Nate permanently paranoid. The Bloody Eye was nothing compared to the Syndicate. Just another minor gang in a collection of minor gangs. If the Bloody Eye was a tiger shark, they were working for the Great White. The Bloody Eye controlled the harbor, but the Syndicate controlled the entire western seaboard. The gang was nothing. Jim knew full well he had nothing to worry about. So why then was he feeling just as paranoid as Nate?